are able to get a handle around the cost of level services budgets. To have level services budgets that increase at a rate of nearly 6% per year within our current revenue environment just simply does not add up. The math, you don't need to be very advanced in math to understand that that equation doesn't work. So the challenge that we see is frankly the need to be able to develop the multi-year plan and present it in a way that is coherent with respect to what the plan is. And the reality is, unless we believe that this community is going to fund annual education-oriented overrides, we are going to have some level of service reduction that's going to be facing us. May not be a popular sentiment, I would acknowledge through the reading of the applause meter, but it is the reality that we face. I would like to emphasize one last point that I made in the last time. The current budget is partially balanced in large part due to a 15% increase in Chapter 70 state funding. I don't think anyone suggests that that is going to be a recurring source of revenue at that level of increase, unless our representatives would like to suggest that that is prudent for us to do. I'm not trying to put them on the spot, but it is the reality that we face. We're not alone, but it is the reality of our current economic situation.
Mr. Witz,
Yes.
do you have someone seeking recognition?
No, I do not at this time.
Okay. Mrs. Pulowski?
Nobody's seeking recognition.
Elena Luongo, 15 Valley Road. Mr. Moderator, I move the question.
Okay, we've moved to the question. That will terminate debate. All those in favor of moving to the question, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? It's a 2/3. Mr. Witz?
Unanimous?
Mrs. Pulowski?
1 no.
Motion carries. Now move to the question. So I've declared a 2/3 majority. I didn't hear enough in the main hall. It was unanimous in the other and 1 no in the other. So I've declared a 2/3. We're going to move to the question now. So this is on the operating budget motion, which excludes the solid waste and debt budgets. Would you like me to read the motion again? Okay. This is to raise and appropriate the sum set forth in the column headed Selectmen Recommended in the line items 1 through 105. This is in the golden handout. 1 through 105, except lines 48, 49, and 95, and to transfer 495 from the Recreation Revolving Fund to fund line 61, including the transfer of all other funds set forth in the Budget Detail Revised dated April 7th, 2008, totaling $45,223,806, and further move to raise and appropriate the additional sums as set forth in the column headed Override Amount, totaling $643,710, provided that such additional sums be expressly approved by the voters at a Prop 2.5 override election pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21C M. And this requires a majority vote. Mr. McGrath.
Ed McGrath, 8 Laurel Road. Could we just get a clarification if this is the vote for both the budget and the override budget, or are they separate items?
No, it's for the budget and the override budget, but the override portion is subject to approval at the polls. If the override portion doesn't fail,
Okay.
it'll be the budget.
Thank you.
As presented in your handout. And there's one more motion on the budget because it requires, that's why the 643,710 doesn't equal the 867 or whatever the number is. I'm not on Finance Committee or Selectmen anymore, so I don't have to remember the numbers, but, and I wasn't on Finance Committee here, just to clarify. But there's another motion because those require two-thirds votes. These line items require a majority vote, okay? Everyone ready to vote? Mr. Witz, is your group ready?
I think so.
Mrs. Palowski?
They're still awake.
We're all set.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries in the main hall. Mr. Witz?
Motion carries in the overflow.
Mrs. Palowski?
Motion carries and overflow too.
Mr. Messeri?
Article 14, Round 2. I move to raise and appropriate the sums set forth in the column headed Selectmen Recommended in the lines 48, 49, Solid Waste, and 95, Debt Service, including the transfer of all funds set forth in the budget detail revised dated April 7, 2008, totaling $5,589,018, and I further move to raise and appropriate the additional sums as set forth in the column headed override amount totaling $223,820, provided that such additional sums be expressly approved by the voters at a Proposition 2.5 override election pursuant to the General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21, CM. This requires a two-thirds vote.
Before we go to the recommendations, earlier I said that this required two-thirds vote for bonding. It's not for bonding. These funds are coming from stabilization accounts, and stabilization accounts require a two-thirds vote of town meeting in order to transfer those funds. So that's the reason for the two-thirds. It's not a bonding issue, and I stand corrected. Sorry for that, if I caused confusion. If we could go to the recommendations, does the Board of Selectmen wish to recommend? Mr. Messeri?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend.
For the Finance Committee?
Finance Committee does not recommend for this because of the inclusion of the override in the vote.
If you couldn't hear, the school committee also recommends. Further discussion? Mr. Witz?
There's no discussion.
Mrs. Palowski?
No discussion.
Miss-
Finance Committee did not recommend.
Mr. Rowe? Mr. Rowe, please wait to be recognized.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you recognized me.
No. Mrs. Unless you changed your name to Mrs. Palowski. No, I didn't. Mrs. Palowski?
No discussion.
No discussion. Mr. Rowe?
I understood correctly, the Finance Committee did not recommend because of the override. I don't understand what the connection is.
They're opposed to the override portion of both of these motions. Both of the motions include the operating budget as was worked out in all the groups. The Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the School Committee worked very hard over the last several months on the operating budget. And there's a non-override budget. And the Finance Committee has said they support that budget. They don't support the override portion of the budget at this time. It's all in one motion, so therefore, they're saying they don't support the motion.
I'm sorry, I'm confused, but
Amy DeCharge, 24 Fieldcrest Terrace. I'm confused as well. Is it something that can be separated? Can someone make a motion to separate them?
Someone could if they chose to.
I make a motion to separate the override budget, the differences.
It could have been done in four, if it were done in four motions, the Finance Committee would probably be doing something different. And now I'm speaking for them, which I probably shouldn't, but... Ms. Mullen, could you please go to the microphone? I'm sorry.
Just a point of clarification now, are we voting on lines such and such through,
We're voting only on line 48 and 49, which is solid waste, and 95, which is debt service. So in the gold-colored handout, you can go to the solid waste budget, look at lines 48 and 49, and if you go down below, there's a little footnote. It tells you the funding source, and it references stabilization. Then go to the debt service, which is towards the back of the handout, and you'll see at the bottom, there's a stabilization account there as well. Whenever you take funds from a stabilization account, you must have a 2/3 vote of town meeting in order to move those funds out. You only need a majority vote to put them in. So you're using stabilization funds, which is like using your savings to fund those portions of the budget. And that's why it requires 2/3. So we're really only voting on 3 line items. Mr. Witz, any discussion from your group?
No, there is not.
Mrs. Palowski?
No discussion.
Any further discussion in the main hall? Seeing none, we'll move to the motion. You want me to read it again? Everybody know what they're voting on? This is lines 48, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's lines 48, 49, which is solid waste, and line 95, debt service, including the transfer of all other funds set forth in the budget detail revised April 7th, 2008, totaling $5,589,018, and further, the additional sums as set forth in the column headed override amount totaling $223,820, and again, you could go back to the solid waste and the debt service budgets and look at that. It says $223,820, provided that such funds be expressly approved by the voters at a Prop 2.5 override election pursuant to General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 21, CM. When you take the $223,820 and the amount from the last motion, that's the override, that's the total override amount. So when you take the 5 million and the other number, that's the total budget. So it's all inclusive in one motion. It's 2 motions because one requires a 2/3 vote. But it's all the handout. Mr. Kirby.
Mr. Moderator, I think it would be helpful if you could clarify the ramifications of a potential no vote on this question. In other words, I have to admit to being personally confused as to what services would be actually impacted if this portion of the budget were to be not approved.
You'd be sending everyone back to the drawing board as it relates to solid waste and debt service. If you support the budget that's in your hands, I lost mine. If you support this budget, this is the budget as prepared and recommended by the Board of Selectmen. The Finance Committee recommends the non-override column, and the School Committee recommends this budget, both the non-override and the override column. If you support this budget, then this motion finishes the budget off, okay? This is the final approval to have this budget approved, and then you'd go to the polls and vote yes or no on an override.